Hey, Eric. I'm Chris Perkins. Really a privilege to be here. Tiny bit about me. I currently run an agency, a global marketing consultancy, actually, that is called Model B, and having a lot of fun doing it for the last couple of years. My background, just briefly, is I've grown up in agencies and also had client-side roles. That's given me the privilege and honor of having visited over 40 countries, lived in 10 U.S. states, and just worked on some really crazy, cool brands. So that's a bit about me.
Very cool. Welcome to the show. Now we talk about so much on this, but I'm just going to get right to it. What is your secret to a good life?
My secret to a good life is being really comfortable, learning, exploring, and pushing yourself to places that you haven't been before. Part of that for me has been the travel I've experienced. Part of that for me is going to experience things that just make me almost like crawl out of my skin with like unease and going to do it. And then always having an open mind about like what's possible to happen. I don't put myself in like crazy risky experiences, so I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. But an example, I went to a Southern Baptist church that was absolutely off the hook, crazy cool, and found myself I was so completely welcomed. I was the only white dude in the place. And when I walked in the back, it was like, what's going on here? And the conversation and the humanity of it all, and just the way it moved me was just amazing. So a friend of mine told me I should go do it. I'm like, yeah, I should do that someday. And it's always one of those things in the back of my mind. And then, after I did it, I just it's been one of those go-to examples of when I talk to people about like ways you should put yourself out there. And that's, to me was just like super enriching.
So comfort with putting yourself out there.
Yep.
Is that something that that has come inherently for you in your life, or have you had to work on that quite a bit to be able to put yourself out there? Was that comfort hard earned?
In some respects, yes. I'm a little bit of an introvert. I do really just fine without a ton of human interaction. My wife's the extrovert of the couple, and we're such a great complement in that way. But I'm the byproduct of a psychologist father and an educator mother. They gave me one of the greatest gifts, which is learn how to learn and always be curious. One of the things that I got out of that kind of hybrid experience from the way they looked at life and behaved and thought about things was the context of what you can pick up from virtually anybody in the world, and the way you can learn and enrich yourself if you're just receptive and aware of what's going on in other people's minds. So a lot of times when I'm looking around in an airport or gas station or restaurant or anywhere, I'm just like insanely curious and running scenarios in my mind of what's going on in that person's life, what's happening there. And to me, that's helped me be a much better marketer, because I'm a real student of human. But it also just for me is part of what turns me on and makes me tick. And part of what I've learned to do more and more over time is to put myself in places where I don't naturally fit in with what's going on. And that helps me to kind of learn and grow.
Do you find yourself making lists of uncomfortable things that you could do for yourself? Is it a proactive exercise where you're like for instance, there's this Japanese concept called misogi. Misogi is your yearly or every 5 years you do this defining thing that is outside of your comfort zone. Do you have a list of all of the misogis that you would like to do that you just keep tacked to the wall? Like, how do you proactively put yourself in those situations and brainstorm on ways that you can flex that muscle?
I don't, but I guess what I would say is I'm an experience junkie in some respects. So I'm definitely one that will seek out a music experience, a live music experience that would be both obvious and sometimes like, why am I here? Just to put myself in a different experience. I've traveled to places that most people would never think to go. Like, and sometimes it was because I needed to go there for business, and sometimes it was like because I was close and wanted to go because it was there, and I knew I'd never, like, I wouldn't make the trip. Like, I wouldn't go to Beirut because that was a destination that was on my list to push myself. I happened to be in Oman, and one of the people I interacted with that was just an amazing individual gave me the confidence that I could actually go to Beirut in a time when it wasn't entirely safe, and be with him and be safe enough to experience it. So that's an example of where I don't have it on a list, but I find my way to those things. And interestingly, it's almost always through an individual that catalyzes it. An individual said, go to this Baptist church. An individual said, when I was in the Greek Isles on an island, I don't remember which one, and it was shoulder season, so off season, and no tourists. Like, that was, and half the shops were closed. And literally, I'm like, crap. I was in the only hotel that had rooms, and it didn't. I happened to pick that one just by luck. And I met somebody in the lobby, and they're like, "There's a place you should go that the locals are going to be eating there, and they won't be open, but I bet they'll let you come in and have a meal. You should try." And I go there, and sure enough, what they were actually having was a wedding reception. I walked in because the door was open, and they thought I was supposed to be there for a second. And then they realized, oh, wait, this dude is like, he doesn't speak any Greek, and he's clearly a tourist, but bring it on. Come on, let's go. And the next thing I know, 3 hours later, I'm like, absolutely had one of those amazing experiences, and we'll always remember that in a really interesting way. Another experience along those lines, I'm an avid fisherman, and I only fish for bass. 99% of the time I fish for bass. Why? Because being good at something requires that you focus on it, and being multi-species just means you want to get outside, and fishing is like what you happen to be doing. But I was fishing in Alabama, southern Alabama, and a friend of mine had said, I went down this dirt road, took a wrong turn, went down this dirt road, and it turns out there's a plantation there that still has homes that were occupied by slaves, that they still have family lines that live in them. I remember thinking, what's that even look like? I couldn't even picture it in my mind, right? And sure enough, and it's a dead end, so it's kind of, you can't get it wrong. And literally at the end of this dead end road, which was dirt and like not in good shape because nobody's taking care of it, there's this like 80-year-old woman sitting on her porch in a rocking chair in this decrepit old home with no electricity and barrels under her eaves to capture water that she uses for a variety of different, and I get out and I said, Mike, my friend, said I should come and say hi if I was ever in the area. And she's like, get on up here, come on up. And we talked for like an hour and a half, and it was the most amazing thing. Half of the stuff we talked about, I didn't even understand it, but it was just like her life experience and the way she lives and the happiness this person has. It's just like, I've told that to my kids when they're like complaining about the fact that we didn't go on vacation to some lavish resort. I'm like, you have to see life through a lens of choice around happiness as opposed to comparison. And when you compare, you'll always be disappointed. If you choose where you are and see what's there, then there's so much richness in it. And those little stories, my kids are like roll their heads because they weren't there, right? It's hard to convey the richness of what it was to me, and it probably wouldn't have been to them in the same way. But one of the things I do look for is with them, when do they have those magic moments? When is it something that occurs to them they're having that special moment? And I make sure they stop and see it. And I feel like, my wife and I both done a good job of helping them learn that.
When you were sitting there on the porch with this old woman, did you realize it at that moment that this was special? Or was it only after the fact, breaking it down, where you've broken and realized like, oh, wow, like, this is going to be a story for me to tell?
I would say that at first I was very nervous because I wasn't sure if somebody else was going to appear from the house or in the area. And and like, what's your motive? Why are you here? What's your motive? And because I'm sure people do show up that have, frustrating motives, or questionable motives. And, but as soon as I felt like we've slipped into a groove, this old hound dog came up and was sitting between us. And I feel like I can still smell the air and see the humidity in that space when I was there. And, those kind of moments for me are just like fantastic, because everything changes pace. Everything just, becomes more rich, and so many, all your senses are on fire. So to answer your question, it was while I was there, but it was, it was a roller coaster in a way, because I was like really on edge when I went in there, and then started to calm in and was totally in the zone. And then I was like, okay, I don't want to overstay my welcome, but how do I say, we'll probably never see this person again? And I haven't, and it's been 15 years, so I'm sure she's probably gone. But, so it's those kinds of things that are just interesting in my life. So, in terms of like having a list, I don't have a list, but I definitely, like, one of the things I get asked have been asked in my career is, why do you change jobs a lot? And my business answer is, I'm curious and I get bored quickly. And that's true. So that's not a misnomer, but it's also because I want to add to the texture of my experience. And so I've been in big companies, small companies, global companies, regional, super regional companies. And I just know myself. And so part of the real answer is, I definitely want to put myself in an uncomfortable situation where I have to learn and grow again. And that, to me, I'll give you an example. So I grew up in the Ogilvy network, which is a big global agency network, part of WPP. And I was working on this shell business domestically. And I had said to my boss, I was working in Houston at the time, and great role, well paid, comfort of life. In fact, I had the classic American dream. I had the house, I had a nice car, a boat, pool table, like all the trappings that I thought were like what made me really happy. And a pool, the whole thing, right? Membership at a golf club. And I'd kind of collected all those things and was kind of like, okay, I didn't have a wife yet, but I was dating somebody that was entertaining and seemed like it was feeling interesting. The head of the office, I said, look, Ross, if there's ever an opportunity for me to go international, let me know. So the first one that comes up actually is in South Africa, and I talked to them, phone call, a couple of phone calls, and it turns out that the role didn't feel right, the vibe wasn't right. It was also a time where taking any earnings that you might save out of the country was next to impossible. Like you basically had to accept that it was a station that you would have a great experience, and some kind of experience, hopefully great, and then go on. And so I passed on it, and the leadership was like, that's a pretty cherry, because it was a premier office, really highly regarded in the network. And the next one that came up was in Warsaw, Poland. And so this would have been 1992. And phone conversation seemed like it was interesting. It's hard to communicate, honestly, because their English was not super good, even though they'd lived in the U.S. for the managing director had lived in the U.S. for 5 or 6 years. It felt awkward a little bit, And but he said to me, he said, I've really enjoyed the conversation. I'd like to pay for you a trip to come over and what you think, because that'll give us, what we need to know to decide. Like, all right, well, free trip, sure. Like, why not? My boss is okay with me taking 3 days off and, basically being out for a week. All right. I've never been to Poland, and what the heck? And so I did a bunch of research, which back then was hard because the internet was, the internet of early days, and like finding like real information about Poland. So I read the Financial Times and the Economist and soaked up all I could. I went over there and had a really positive experience, generally speaking. But it was clear that like young folks would speak English somewhat and to varying degrees. The middle-aged folks and senior folks, next to none. In fact, they would typically say, "Do you speak Dutch?" Or some other regional language, or Russian or something. And didn't speak. I mean, I learned 5 or 6, 10 words in Polish. Beer, bathroom, cab, hotel, the important ones to get around. And I remember being just like, "Wow, this is such an interesting experience. This would be like really intense." And I flew back, landed in Houston, called my parents and said, "That was an amazing experience, but I'm not going to do it because this is just like, I am so being like pushed outside of my comfort zone. And I have to give up everything I have here. I worked so hard to build all this." And I went to the office the next day and I told my boss I'd taken the job. And he said, "Are you sure? Like, what do you think?" And I said, "Yeah, I feel like what this is an opportunity that I'll never have again. And, it's for a couple of years and it's a 1-year contract. So it might just be a year. And a year goes by so fast. And so I'm going to take a shot and go do it." And I'll tell you, it was hard. I learned so much. But I look back at that as one of the probably seminal moments where I put myself in a completely complex situation. Literally as my first week there, I started, learning Polish from a teacher. And we would meet at 8:00 Monday through Friday. She taught me, like the first day, she taught me bribe. Well, why? Because, even though bribes are common in the world, they're very common in lots of places. In fact, they're like accepted and reasonable, She actually made me think of it differently. She said, "Think of it as like tipping, right? You guys in America have this weird convention of like tipping somebody when half the time all they did was what they're supposed to. And like, that's weird to us. So think of it as like tipping. And you just do it at a different time sometimes. You do it before the service. But it was fascinating to learn, and the Polish people were just absolutely extraordinary and welcomed me in. And, I dated a gal over there for a while that took me out to her family countryside home, Dachau. We going around those areas, you would see these aristocracy, the formerly communist kind of like country homes where the elites had their places and around that you see farms, and you go around and get your eggs at one and you get your bread at another, and go to the butcher, the guy that has fresh meat. And it was just absolutely incredible. It was like a time traveling experience, but it was also amazing to be in Poland in 93, 94 to see the world change so fast. But that's just an example of like putting yourself way outside your envelope. And I often tell that at career days because I people to see the world and kind of stretch themselves. And I said, you don't have to go this far, but like you should go on a trip somewhere that might put you out there. Because that's over in a week or whatever you decide to stay. And I guarantee you'll grow from it.
Chris, you're a splendid storyteller. You have so many, and I just want to keep shaking the tree for apples to fall down. But where can everyone find you?
The easiest place to find me is LinkedIn. And if you find a Chris Perkins, there's a bunch of Chris Perkins there. But if you find the one that has Topher Perkins, TOPHER PERKINS, that's me. And I'd be happy to engage you there, or you can connect with me there and we can find each other through other channels as well.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely, Eric. Thank you.
This has been the Pulse Ox podcast. Please, if you found this episode valuable, give us a like on Spotify and share it with a friend.